We have been in a series called Simple Life, and we've been looking at ways that we can live that simple life in the midst of a chaotic world, a crazy world. How can we live a life of simplicity? Not that we do away with everything, but that we focus on the most important things. So the first week we looked at our relationship with God, putting God first. Last week we talked about time, and this week we're going to talk about money. And I know everyone's excited. I was so excited, I tried to keep pushing this off on other pastors. How about you preach this sermon? Pastor Amanda, this would be a perfect sermon for you. Let's just take out that children's story because every pastor loves to talk about money. This morning, kind of as an icebreaker, I want to look at, show a video of a couple who are struggling with money and maybe in a slightly humorous way. So join with us as we watch this clip. Wouldn't finances be a lot easier if it was just that? I have money, I don't buy it. I mean, they're struggling. This is perhaps a humorous take on a very real issue we all deal with. How do we use our money wisely? How do we spend our money? This is something that even last night my wife and I were talking about. Well, do we put money to pay off some debt, some student loan stuff, or do we save it? 50% of marriages talk about how finances, money, is a strain on their relationship. 50%. When I do premarital counseling, one of the things that I cover each and every time, because it's so vitally important, is the issue of money. How do we handle money? Are you a saver or a spender? And what does it mean to come together as a couple and figure out a way to budget and to use your finances wisely? The truth is, although maybe that's a more humorous take, my guess is that you've thought through that either with a spouse or with children or with just thinking about it in your own head. How do I handle my money? Do I buy a home? Do I have enough money to afford a car? What does it mean to give to church, and especially if you don't have a lot of money? How do I live faithfully and give faithfully even though I know I have 1,000 things that I could spend that money on? Or here's a real one as well. And do I buy this thing that I don't really need? It may be really nice and I can afford it, but is this a wise investment of my money in this? Should I be spending my money in this way? How do we handle money? We don't like to talk about it in the church. Like there's those subjects that we don't talk about. It's like, oh, this is a controversial one, so we don't want to talk about these things. But I think that has led to some of the problems that we have with money and how we spend it and how we use it. Questions and sometimes guilt-inducing questions. Guilt about how we spend our money and whether we're doing it wisely. How do we spend our money, use our money, take the money that we have and use it in a way that is honoring God? Because here's the thing. The topic that Jesus talked about more than any other was money. And so if it was important to Jesus, it should be important to us. It should be something that we're talking about. How do we honor God with our money, with our finances? This morning, I want to start in a place that Jesus talks about, because if we're going to talk about our money, that's a good place to start. What does Jesus have to say about our money, about our talents, our resources? So turn with me to the book of Matthew chapter 25. Just ignoring talking about money doesn't solve the problems. And so let's look at what Jesus has to say about money and ways we can use our money, what it means to put God first when we use our money. Matthew chapter 25. Jesus is telling this parable to his disciples. Starting in verse 14. It says, again, it will be like a man going on a journey, Now, this is a wealthy man. In fact, some versions talk about master or king. Again, it will be like a man, a wealthy man going on a journey who calls his servants and entrusts his wealth to them. I'm going to be gone for a while. I'm going to give you all some money. I'm entrusting you. Use it boldly. Use it wisely. Use these things that I'm giving to you wisely. Now, it was still his money, but he's entrusting it to his servants, to his stewards. To the one he gave 5 bags of gold. Some of your translations may talk about talents. So the first he gave 5 talents. 1 talent was 15 years' wages. So I hope that gives you like some perspective here. So to this first servant he gives 5 bags, or he gives 75 years worth of wages. He entrusts that to him. He gives generously to the first one. To another, the second servant he is called, he gives 2 bags, or 30 years worth of wages. And to another he gives 1 bag, 15 years worth of wages, each according to his ability. Now, it doesn't say like the criteria that the master uses to gauge ability. It just simply says this master, through his own thinking, through his own looking at the situation, he's giving to each one differently. And then he went on a journey. The man who received 5 bags, or 5 talents of gold, went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more bags. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. So in other words, the master has benefited, and you too will benefit. You too will share in my happiness, share in the goodness, share in the blessing. The man with 2 bags of gold also came, and the same scenario plays out. He says, Master, I've got 2 bags, and I've doubled it, and I've got you 2 more. And the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. Come, share in your master's happiness. Pick it up in verse 24. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, investing where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See here what belongs to you. So this servant acted out of fear. Oh man, I know my master's a hard man. He's not generous. He hasn't reaped what he hasn't sown these things. Like he's very cheap. He's very penny wise. I better, in my own mind, I'm afraid of what he might do to me if I lose this money. And so I'm going to go out and I'm going to dig a hole in the ground. And when he comes back, well, then I'll go dig it back up again. That was his mindset. He's working out of a place of fear of his master. Verse 26, the master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I had not sown and gather where I had not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. I could at least put it in the bank, right? Get that 0.02% or whatever it is. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has been given more, they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In other words, to this third servant he says, listen, you have no idea who I am. You don't know my heart. You don't know my mission. And I can see that in how you've used money. And so depart. Leave my house. You have been proven and shown untrustworthy with what you've been given. It may seem harsh, but in the reality, this third servant didn't understand his master whatsoever. He was working from a place of fear. In our own lives, when we look at all of those important questions when it comes to money, how do I spend my money? How do I live not outside of my means, but also not live maybe like a pauper as well, not live like I don't have anything as well? How do I spend? Can I go on vacation? Can I buy a newer car? How do I leave a legacy for my family? How big of a house is too big? And we can become overwhelmed with these questions and daily, like, can I buy this thing? Am I using my money wisely? And we can begin to really question how we spend money. But I just want us to pause, to stop for a moment. Because if we get bogged down in the little questions, the everyday questions of what's a good way to spend my money, and can I buy this or can I buy that? Let's look at a bigger umbrella question first, okay? Because it'll help us with the little questions. How do you view God? How do you understand who God is? This third servant was working from a place of fear. Oh, he's stingy, he's ungenerous. Now think about that for a moment. He gave him 15 years of wages. What would happen if your boss came to you and said, here's 15 years worth of your wage? Use it. Like, invest it wisely. And if you invest it wisely and like you can share in the harvest, you can share in the bounty that you get. Would you look at him as ungenerous? As a bad person? Because the truth is, the master had invested his money in these servants. I think sometimes we view God as sort of like an ungenerous God. The truth is, the scripture tells us that every good gift we have comes from God. Every good gift we have comes from God. God generously pours out blessings upon us. And sometimes we don't always understand, like, why does so-and-so have more money than I do? And why do I only have the 2 bags? Or why did he give him 5 or her 5? And we can get bogged down in those questions. It's not up for us to understand. What is up for us to understand is, how do we be faithful with what God has given to us? God has blessed us generously, and he has invested in us all of our money. Not 10% of our money, all of our money. He has invested with us. And he says, use it to bring about a harvest. We talk about how God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That's what the Old Testament. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Yeah, and he's invested it in you and you. You own some of God's cattle. You're watching out for it. And he says, use this to bring a harvest that is much greater than anything. 30, 60, 100 times what I've sown into you. See, when we invest our money wisely in the kingdom, it brings kingdom dividends. It multiplies. Did you catch it? Invest a little bit and it'll bring about a harvest 30, 60, 100 times what is sown. When we use our money for the kingdom, it multiplies exponentially. It brings kingdom dividends. I think sometimes we get frustrated because we don't always see the immediate results of our investments. Sometimes when we give, we don't see immediate results, and we like to see immediate results. We like to see our money at work, whether that's investing in your 401k or in the bank or whether it's investing in a church or in a charity. We want to see immediate results, but we don't always have the opportunity to see the dividends that our giving brings, that our investing brings. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And it can be easy for those of us, and I say those of us, I'm including myself as one of you, like those of us who may not have a lot of money, it can be easy to say, well, I mean, what's my $5 going to make to the church budget? I mean, I can think of 100 ways I can use that $5 in different ways. Or what is my $1,000 or 10, whatever it would be, whatever amount of money. It can be easy for those of us who don't have a lot to say, well, what difference does my little amount make? I'll just keep it to myself. Jesus, as he's sitting in the temple and he sees a widow who gives just a mite, like the smallest coin possible, and she tosses her money in. She gives it to the temple, and Jesus praises her because she has given out of her lack, not out of her abundance. You may be here this morning and you think to yourself, well, I don't have a lot, like my money doesn't make a big difference. But here's the thing, you've invested in the kingdom and it will bring a kingdom dividend. It will multiply exponentially. You may not always see it, but it does. God sees your faithfulness. God is more concerned about your faithfulness than about how much money you give. Your might, your whatever it is beautiful. Do you know that? To those of us who do have resources, who do have money, I think in the church especially, like we can sometimes feel guilty about how much we have. But the thing is that God is the one who has chosen to invest in you. Whether it's a small amount or a big amount, God has said, I'm investing this in you to be used for my kingdom, to bring about a dividend, to bring about a harvest that is much greater than even that a lot that you give. And your giving too is beautiful. I don't always understand, and man, God, it'd be nice to have more, but maybe God for some reason sees that it's better that I don't. We don't always understand why God invests in some ways, but he has, and he expects us to be faithful with what we have, what we've been given. And that which we give, he uses to bring a harvest that is much greater than we could ever conceive of. As a church community, I've seen the ways we have invested our money. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a youth auction. $35,000 was raised. $35,000 was invested in our youth. As a church, we give. Now, it can like it's never glamorous to like pray for the NIPSCO or to give to the NIPSCO bill, right? But the NIPSCO bill allows us to invest in our children. You saw them up here. See, when you give, no matter how big or how small, you're investing in our children. If you grew up in the church, you're a product of someone else's investment. You're a product of someone else giving so that you could be the harvest. You could be the dividend that comes in. I've seen some of the ways that some of our Sunday school classes have invested their money how they've pooled their resources to help someone put on a roof or to help a woman in need. And it can be easy to say, well, I don't see the immediate results of that. But trust me when I say it'll bring a kingdom dividend, because God is at work to take that money and to use it for heavenly results, to use it for kingdom dividends, to get a harvest that is much greater than we could ever imagine. God is at work when we use our money. And so when we send missionaries, 9 missionaries throughout the United States and throughout the world, and we've invested in their work, and we understand that even though they may be off in another country and we're not seeing the results every day, trusting that God is the one who brings the harvest and is bringing the harvest through our investment in them. Kingdom giving, kingdom investment multiplies to kingdom dividends. My question for you this morning is, are you being faithful with what God's invested in you? I don't want you to answer this question in a guilt-inducing way. I don't want you to leave here feeling guilty about how you haven't given enough or what. That's not my purpose here this morning. My purpose is for you to understand this. Pray to God. Ask God, what does faithfulness look like for me? What would you have me do with your money? As we've been talking about the series, it's important to clarify your mission. Your mission, first and foremost, would be to put God first. Say, God, not 10% of this is yours, all of this is yours. So let's understand that. But God, how would you have me invest your money? How much of this do you want me to give back to the work of the local church, or to the work of this charity or that charity, or the work of your kingdom in Jamaica or Southeast Asia or Mexico, wherever we would have missionaries, or wherever you would support a missionary, or the various good, godly, kingdom-advancing causes that are out there? How would you have me invest this money, trusting that you are going to bring about a harvest through it? Clarify your mission. Understand that it's God's money first. And seek God's wisdom in how you would invest it, reinvest it in the kingdom. Second, assess your situation. If you say, I'm going to give X amount to the kingdom work, assess what changes to your lifestyle may come with that. Some of you, it may be to start giving just a little bit each week. Or for some of you, it may be giving a little bit more, or God may have said, it's okay if you give a little bit less. You're still faithful. How would this change in your mission change your life? How does it affect your budget? Some of it may be important to know how much you are giving, how you are spending your money. Have you ever thought about that? Keeping track of your finances so that you can understand how you're using money. Create a budget. Next, move to action, move to change. Change your life. This can be the hardest one, especially when it comes to money. It may mean one less trip to Starbucks or out to eat. I don't know what it might look like for you, the ways that God might be speaking to you about money. Again, my point here is not to be guilt-inducing, but it's to say, talk to God. Seek God's wisdom. I want you to be able to give out of a place of joy, not out of a place of guilt. When you give, do you give out of a place of joy? I know some churches, and I'm not saying we should do this, but maybe it wouldn't be a horrible, when they announce the offering, they all clap. Now, some of it may be forced, I don't know. But when we give, do we give not with like, there goes my money? But this money is going to be used by God in amazing ways. This money is going to be used by God for our youth, for our children, for the discipleship of our adults. This money is going to be used to advance the gospel throughout the world. That brings me joy. Wondering all of the things I could have bought brings me sorrow. Focusing on the right things. Focusing on the joy. To give out of a place of joy. Now finally, the last one is examine your progress. How's it going? A year from now, look back at your budget. Did I achieve my mission? Maybe slowly, maybe incrementally. Did I achieve what I felt God was calling me to do? Was I faithful with what God had been investing in my life? This morning, the one thing I want you to take home from all of this is Jesus said a lot about money, and I didn't say near it as much of it today. It's to understand this. When you give to the kingdom, it multiplies into kingdom dividends. A kingdom harvest that is much greater than we could ever imagine. Maybe it's one life changed that changes a community, that changes a country, that changes the world. Maybe it's just one life. God works in ways that we don't always understand. But when we give to the kingdom, we build God's kingdom here. And so I applaud you for the ways that you have been faithful. And I encourage you to look at your money, to clarify your mission. And in so doing, a lot of those questions about how we spend our money, when we put God first, when we seek God's kingdom first, when we do that, a lot of these other questions get answered for us. And we live faithfully with what God's given to us, what God's invested and entrusted to us. As the worship team comes forward, maybe you're here this morning and you would simply say, like, I need wisdom. Maybe it's like I need to reevaluate my understanding of God. And you would simply say, listen, I need prayer this morning. Like maybe like that couple you feel in over your head for whatever reason. Maybe it's not spending more than you've made. It's just one crisis after another has happened, and you simply say, like, God, I need your help financially. I'm trusting you to provide for me. Maybe it's what does it mean to live faithfully, and maybe you would simply desire prayer for that. Or maybe you're here this morning and you need prayer for something else. Healing, wisdom, discernment, we invite you up. The prayer team will be up here in a moment. But to simply seek God. Say, God, through me, will you build your kingdom here? Will you stand?